answer your attention. Unfortunately, because we're on a little bit of a time crunch today, we won't have as much time as we would like, especially for such an interesting topic. So what we are hoping to do is we'll do the standard presentation as we've always done before. But if you guys have questions or comments, or you want to discuss something with Robert, we highly encourage it. We would just ask if we could wait for the lunch portion of it. That way you guys will have time to just converse as much as you like, while also having had the full presentation. I would normally prefer to be able to just go for it and, you know, the kind of the what university lecture style of it. But just because we have, we're short on time, we'll have to do it in a slightly different way. So without further ado, I will let Robert take over. Thank you guys so much for coming back in, and we can get started. So it's all yours.
Thanks. So, as we said, after the presentation, I'll be available. I'm not in a rush to go, so I will have time to answer to all your questions and whatsoever. Okay? Yeah, our today's topic, we're going to talk about history, communities, and cemeteries. The main thing is, you know, all of you have lots of experience. You know, you lived for a long time, and you lived here for a long time. And we're gonna go through lots of pictures, photographies of old places and old buildings. And we're gonna do a little reflection on this past and what's coming for the future generation. What are the main defeats? What is challenges that all the youngsters will have to preserve all this patrimonial buildings and knowledge and communities that our ancestor gave us, that you took care of, and now it's their time to take care of. Without further ado, we'll see if it works. Oh, just unmute yourself. Unmute. Okay, great. Let's see if it's changed. No. Okay, great. So, a long time ago, we're going back in time. This is Argenteuil, 13,000 years ago. The place that you are seated right now would have been about a kilometer of ice above your head. Not a kilometer like as long as Main Street on this side, but must have been so heavy on the territory. And then, slowly but surely, Champlain Sea, you know, the melting of the ice melt. And here, we were underneath about, I would say, 100 meters of water. 100 meters of water. That's 300 feet, more than 300 feet of water. That's quite a lot of water that was above our head. And probably some of you knew that before, but you know, when we're digging the ground, sometimes we end up on rocks, which is the bedrock. Sometimes we end up on sand. That sand must have been the bottom of the sea. And in that sand, sometimes you would find some shells, right? Or traces of big mammals.
Good fishing.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know what you did, but yeah. Okay. So this is Champlain Sea, and it was. You see, Montreal is here. Yeah. And we have Argenteuil around here. So the sea was going up north. And you will see.
Water doesn't run uphill.
No, but the height of the water, it was more than 350 feet for certain places. So you can imagine the mountain, the ridge rock on the other side. As we said, McGibbon Ridge Rock. It must have been underwater too, right? And water was going up to Harrington. You will see. Now we have towns, places. There were beaches in Mont-Laurier and Fermaneuil of the Champlain Sea, okay? And then Harrington here, the Valley of Harrington, was part of the beaches of the northern beaches of the Champlain Sea. And here, Gore too, you see? So all the chute, Brownsburg up to Pine Hill was underneath the water. That's quite incredible. But you have to remember, a kilometer of ice above the earth crust must have been so heavy that the earth crust would bend, just like your mattress. You know, when you go to sleep at night, you get in your bed, and then your mattress will form around your body. So it's the same thing with the ice. The earth crust went like this, and after the retrieving of the ice and the retrieving of the water, the ground raised and raised and raised and raised, and it's still rising. It's a long process. You know, 13,000 years, it's not a lot of years in Earth history. The planet has itself 5 billions of years old. You know the difference between 1 million and 1 billion? Are you good in mathematics? If you have to count to 1 million, how much time will it take to count to 1 million? About 1 million seconds, right? And 1 million seconds is about 10 to 11 hours. 1 billion. What would have been more than 30 years to count. So every second you count to 1 billion, it will take you above 30 years. So that's the difference between 1 million and 1 billion. That's incredible. So Earth's story is seen on 5 billions of years. So it's a long, long, long process of evolution and movement. So why does the water, you know, flew away from our territory? Just because the earth crust kept on rising and rising and rising. And then the water took ways to go to the sea, to the big sea. And those ways were the rivers. The Rouge River, the North River, the West River, and then the Ottawa River. Huh? So all that water went back to the sea. And we end up with our territory. Oh, sorry. I'll have to go down there. It doesn't want to work if there's a pop-up.
I'm going to close it.
Okay. Good. There we are. And then after that, we had the big Lamsalis Lake, which was part of the big, all the Great Lakes that we have. But the Lamsalis Lake disappeared. They say that Lamsalis was an Algonquin name for whales. So it was the lake of the whales. Can you imagine that there were whales swimming in these water right above your head here or in the chute? That's quite incredible. When you think about it, how we know that? It's because we searched the ground. Archaeologists searched the ground all around Montreal, all around Ottawa River, okay? Up to Ottawa, to Pembroke, Ontario, and they found traces of big whales, ancient humpback whales. See? This is what they found. 1868. At that time, we had answers in 1868. How come they didn't tell us that story in our history courses or geographical courses, eh? Yeah, I don't know why. Probably because they were too, I wouldn't be hard on, probably a little bit sloppy. Yeah. But this is a story of what it was. This is part of a whale. It's whale's bones that were found near Pembroke, Ontario. And then we had archaeologists digging the ground in Ontario on the southern side of the Ottawa River. And they found lots of old bones of big sea mammals. It's quite incredible when you think about it, eh? So when people say that, there were probably sharks swimming in our waters near Ilosha, and they had like 3 feet between the ice. Maybe it's a right story, or maybe not. You know, when I say you go fishing story, yeah. But we know something. When the water retrieved, there were lots of big fish in our sea, in our waters. And you know they were fishing salmon here in Lachute? Salmon. Salmon used to go up the North River, through St. Andrews, up through the big chute in Lachute, and over here, dropping by here. And you know, they have a big hole, a fosse in the North River, just by McGibbon Ridge. And that fosse is, I would say, 60 feet deep. So the salmon used to go there to die. How come the salmon didn't go up anymore? We built dams on the river. From the time that we built dams, the salmon didn't go up the river anymore. We should have thought about that. You know, the ancestors should have thought about that, and they probably would have built, you know, like the stairs for the salmon, like we see in some other places that they did that, but here not. So today there's no more salmon. If we decided to remove the dams on the North River, would the salmon would come back? Probably. Probably, yeah, because they have it's in their genetic. They will probably find a way to go up the Ottawa River, then up the North River, up to Lachute. That could be incredible, right? Yeah. So can you imagine in your lifetime? So from the day you were born up till today, there was no salmon in our river. But when your grandfather was there in the 19th century, probably there were still salmon in the North River. So it's not a lot of generations, you know, the gap between the disappearing of the salmon in the North River, it's not a long gap. It's 2 or 3 generations. That's it. Oh, I wanted to show you this picture because it's part of our story, eh? The first contact between the first people and the people who came from Europe. This is all the illness that they transport with them, you know, the bacteria and the illness and everything. So they say that before the arriving of Christopher Columbus, there were more than 125 million people living in America. 100 years later, 9 out of 10 were dead because of the illness. So that means in all the lineage, you know, the generation, it goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You live. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's only one person here who would have lived through the illness. It's quite incredible. So this is the story of the first contact between Europe and America. So when the French came here, or the Spaniard, or the Portuguese, or the English, or the Netherlands, when they came here to America, they brought illness. And it's not war that destroyed the people who were living here. Mostly it was the illness, les maladies. We have variole, the disease. Yeah, the disease, sorry, illness, it's disease. Yeah, it's a disease. Yeah. So variole and petite vérole, all these things, la rougeole, all these old disease that we know. So the story that they told us was more the story of those who came after the disease, the time of disease. And the time of disease must have been from 1492 up to 1600, you know. And after that, they came here and they start writing the history that we know. Okay, so this is the same thing with the decline of the population in the St. Lawrence Valley, okay? From 1534 to 1660, this is the decline of the population. 9 out of 10 died of the disease.
9%.
Yeah, 90% of the people. See? So they decided to close at the Long Sault, not to permit the people to go in the valley of the St. Lawrence Valley because of the disease. It was too present for 100 years. So by the time Cartier came here and by the time Champlain arrived, I would say 80 years, close to 80 years later, there were nobody in the valley. It's quite incredible, right? So this is the story that we heard. But this is part of our territory. You know why? Because we are right here, right there. This was the Forbidden Valley for those who live here, the Anishinaabe and the Odenoshawnee. Odenoshawnee is the Iroquois. Anishinaabe is the Algonquin. Okay, so the Algonquin, who were Anishinaabe, lived on the northern side, and the Odenoshawnee lived on the southern part of the Ottawa River. And here, at the Long Sault in Carillon, it was the front door to the St. Lawrence Valley. So people had to cross by there, pass by there. Okay. Huh. Again, this is the First Nation on the Ottawa. We had the Wescarenes that were living close by here. So probably the Wescarenes were settled here in Lachute, above the big chute, fishing salmon. And they would go up north during winter time and go down south during summertime. You know why? Because of the mosquitoes. They knew about. You know how they fought the mosquitoes? They used the cedar. You know the cedar. You know on the cedar. They had a little round thing like that. Yeah, and they would press it in their palm, in their hands, and then they will go like this. So cedar is a repellent. It's a natural repellent.
It's like a gum.
It's like yeah.
Sticky. Don't go near your life, but these feelings are out.
So you have names like that. Onon Charonon, which were Odenoshawnee. You have Matu Wescarini, the Kishisipirini. You have the Kotakutukumini. Names we never heard of. It's really names we never heard of. No. How come? I'm always wondering why they didn't tell us that story before. You see? This is why I'm doing it now, because this is my purpose. It's one of my goals, you know, to tell that story, the story of those who were there before, just like the ancestors who were there before. They were there here before, you know, they occupied the land, they farmed the land, they were farmers. Some of them were farmers. Some of them cropped corn. And you know, in French, we say blé d'Inde. Two things. It's not wheat. Corn is not wheat, so we shouldn't use blé. It's not wheat, right? D'Inde's India. So it's the wheat from India. It's not wheat, and we're not in India, we're in America. So it's corn, right? Maïs. Yeah. The right word is maïs, because the Anishinaabe use maïs. Maïs. So corn is a good translation, because corn doesn't mean wheat, right? It's corn. It's the right word, but in French, we use blé d'Inde. It's not blé d'Inde. We're not in India. And it's not wheat. It's not blé, okay?
Where's the name Iroquois, Huron and Cherokee come from then?
Hey?
Where are all these modern names for Indians, where do they come from?
Probably from those who encountered them at first, they decided because they were hearing something. You know, when you hear another language and you're not familiar with that language, what happened? You misplaced everything. And you go with the sound, and writing it with the sound, you would write it. But if you have you misplaced the orthograph or so this is what happened. So probably the Cherokee, they were not named the Cherokee.
All right.
Yeah, they were probably they have another name for their tribes.
Apaches and all that.
Yeah, Apaches and yeah,
Like all function names from the.
yeah,
Like in the movies.
yeah. Just like it was too complicated, you know, for them, you know, for Champlain to say that Ottawa River was the Kishi-Sipirini River, because it was the river of the people from Kishi-Sipirini. It was too hard for him to understand. So he find a way, and he decided to call it Utawak. Utawak, but the Utawak, they live in Lac-Carrier. So they were not on that river, but that was easier for him to write that.
Those names are made up by white men. Because
Yeah.
the Indians didn't have an alphabet.
No, they didn't have an alphabet, but they called themselves something. You know, like Anishinaabe, it means the people of the land. That's the Anishinaabe. And the same thing with the Haudenosaunee, it means the people of the land. So it means the same thing. Okay? Just like we say today, we are from Argenteuil. So we live on this land. We are Argenteuillois. That's interesting, eh? Yeah. But me, it fascinates me that all the time. When I did the research on the first tribes who lived there in Argenteuil, people start settling Argenteuil land 6,000 years ago. Okay, so that means 6,000 years ago. That's way back. Yeah, it's a lot of generation. And they settled, you know, in St. Andrews, on the old St. Andrews golf course. They settled there. They settled at Carillon. They settled at Grenville. And then they went up north, you know. But when they settled there, they cropped the land and they left traces of their passage, which is quite incredible. And those traces are objects like that. This is a flint chisel that was used to crop, to do the line, and you would put the little corn there. That was used to crush the corn and do corn flour, so that they could make bread. You see? This, we found that in St. Andrews. And I was an archaeologist who found that. It was in 1957. And from that time, we knew that people settled here 5,000 years ago. Quite incredible.
That's the real history.
Yeah. And this too, this is a primitive axe. It was used, you know, when they were doing the canoe with the, how do you say boulot in English? Bark, yeah, the bark canoe. You know, they use that axe to, the log, and they use that axe too to crush things, you know, and they use that axe too to cook the bread. Huh? That's a tanoir. It was used to remove the flesh from the skin. And do you know the fur? Back in those days, they were wearing the fur inside. So right on your body. Why? Because it was warmer. And then the leather skin was outside, because that was against the water, you know, it was a protection. But when the French arrived here, they decided to reverse everything, you know, to put the fur on the outside because they will look nicer and everything. But they didn't keep warm, you know. They didn't listen to the old ways. These are pipes fragment that we found in St. Andrews. This a special rock that they used to do that. Sometimes it would have been bones, but that was rocks. And for sure, the arrowheads. All these arrowheads were found here, either in St. Andrews or in Grenville. It's quite incredible. So this is why we know that they were here from a long, long time ago. All these artifacts are at the museum, the Argenteuil Museum. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and then you have pottery. And you see this? There are little lines there. Those are typical Haudenosaunee pottery. So they did this little thing, and these are about, I would say, 2,000 years old. Yeah. So at that time they were crafting those things and they marked those little things, you know. So we found that in St. Andrews too. There we go. Now we're not so long ago. There were places. This was by the Ottawa River in Cushing. Before the flooding of the dam, the Carillon Dam in 1962. So that picture was taken around, I would say 1957.
Would that be near where the present St. Mungo's Church is?
Just in the back,
Downriver?
just downriver.
Downriver?
Yeah, because that was the old sawmill, Lemuel Cushing sawmill. So Cushing came from Lemuel Cushing, who was the owner of the old store, the Cushing store, and he was the owner of that mill. So that mill today is underneath water, probably
Downriver?
Yeah.
Church.
yeah, from the church downriver. Yeah. So there were places. Oh, forgotten places. That was just by the canal. Chute-à-Blondeau Canal.
Can you bring it?
Yeah, no, between Chute-à-Blondeau would have been close to Cushing again. Yeah, there was an island there in the middle of the Ottawa River. That island doesn't exist anymore. It's underneath 50 feet of water. Yeah, because when they built the dam, you know what they did? It was Grenville here, Carillon there. Three series of rapids, okay? One from Grenville to Greases Point, and then you had Chute-à-Blondeau, and then you have the big chute in Carillon. So Carillon was 60 feet lower than Grenville. They built a wall and they filled it with water. That's what they did.
Why?
Why? Electricity, modernity, okay?
At
Yeah.
my house where I grew up, it's got 60 feet of water over.
Yeah, where was it in
Just 2 miles above Carillon.
okay, that was close to Cushing, yeah,
Well, halfway.
halfway from Cushing. What they used to call front of Chatham,
Yeah.
yeah.
In
Well-
fact, the place was called Mona Lisa.
Mona Lisa, yeah. And they were forgotten people, you know. This is a tombstone of one of the soldiers who built the Carillon Canal. He fell down the ridge and he drowned. So they decided to bury him just by the canal. But that tombstone stayed there. He was buried in 1828. Yeah. So in 1962, when they flooded the ground, he had no families around. So nobody decided to dig and take the corpse of the rest of his corpse and bury it in another cemetery. So he's underneath 60 feet. So they are forgotten people just underneath that water.
That are in the water presently?
Hey?
That's
Yeah.
shown as under the Ottawa
Yeah,
River now?
yeah, it is, yeah.
Mhm.
Disappearing heritage. Locks. That's the Carillon locks. But the upper part,
Worked on that block.
Yeah, he was the
Open the gate.
opening the gates and closing the gate, because you know the way what it works with the canal, eh? They had to go up the river, so they made locks. So locks were like little walls of water, whoops, and then we go up, and then we go up, and then we go up. It was 11 locks through all the Ottawa Canal system. Here, the Longsault system, 11 locks, yeah. 7 on the Grenville Canal, 1 on the Chute à Blondeau, and no, 2 on Chute à Blondeau and 3 on Carillon Canal. So, is that right? 7, 7, 1, 7, 1, 3, yeah. Sometimes we try to preserve those old houses, you know, that this was one of the houses that would have been flooded by the Carillon Dam, okay? But it ended up in a pile of rocks like that in the Carillon Park. Yeah, then we lost it in oblivion. People had good intention, but it always depends on who's in charge. You know, what are the main, the prime directives, like we say. So Parc Canada had a good intention of rebuilding that house. They wanted to build in the Parc Carillon a village like the Upper Canada Village. They wanted to do that in 1967 for the century of the Confederation. But they were lacking money. So that beautiful house that we saw ended up in a pile of rock, and probably it is still there. Yeah. So, wow. Or sometime it's lost in the wild. So this is a beautiful forest. It's not so close by. It's on Scotch Road, above Scotch Road settlement. There was an ancient church. It was the St. Mary's Church. It was an Anglican church on Scotch Road, just by the Presbyterian Church, which today we have the Scotch Road Cemetery. But right there, underneath those trees, there's a community of about 60 people who are buried there. There is no more martyrs, no traces of their passage. Nobody knows who's buried there. One of my main goals is to find out who they were, what were they doing there? They were probably settlers, pioneers, who came to Scotch Road, a community of Anglican, probably Irish Protestant, who settled a part of Scotch Road settlement because they were Scots there, Presbyterian or the Church of Scotland who lived there. But there were 2 Irish Protestant who settled in the Scotch Road settlement. There is no more marker. How do I know that? It's because somebody brought me there. And the thing is, we can't go public with that because, you know, with the kids and all their, some people have really weird intentions. So we're trying slowly but surely to find out who they were. So I hope in a couple of years I will have the answers.
Well,
It's quite an inquiry, eh?
Before you change sides, was that church on the Scotch Road?
Yeah, the church was on Scotch Road, and the church they moved.
Was it moved up into the village of Kilmar?
No, that's the Presbyterian one.
Because we used, my history was, there was a church, as you say, Scotch Road was moved up to the Kilmar.
Yeah.
And we used that as a church building for
Yeah.
years and years.
Yeah.
Was that the building that was moved up to the church settlement, up to the town site?
Yeah. Yeah, but no, it's not the Anglican one, it was the Presbyterian one. That was moved to Kilmar.
The Kilmar site?
Yeah, and then after that church ended up at, how do you call that?
Over Valcarol?
Yeah, Valcarol.
That's the building,
Yeah.
that's the building.
Yeah.
with the town of Scotch,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
Both the volume
Yeah.
of, Bob here.
Yeah.
But that was the church of
Yeah.
Scotch, moved up to the south
Yeah.
of Kilmar where we had our church.
yeah.
And then when, I believe Canadian Factories was changing about, we
Mhm.
didn't need our church.
Yeah.
So we made arrangements to have.
Yeah.
Wayne purchased that.
Yeah, he purchased it and he
it's
brought it at the
on
Valcarol,
our site now.
yeah. But it's not that Anglican one. It was a Presbyterian one. You know, when you go to Scotch Road Cemetery, just down the hill, there are still the foundation of that church, and it is the church that he's talking about. That one was moved to Stonefield. Anybody knows about the village of Stonefield? It was down by the water near Greases Point. You know, Greases Point is by the Ottawa River, and then you had to go down by the water where Mr. Owens has his marketplace, and that little church was moved down there to Stonefield and got flooded by the Ottawa River. So it seems like sometimes, you know, the story of those pioneer families meant to be lost. Unless there is somebody who's asking question or going on a special inquiry. Sometimes those patrimonial sites are forgotten. What is this? That's the Ayres factory. That's the Ayres factory, but it was in 1940. It was quite big. So you see on the North River, you have the dam here, and then down there, you have the other dam, Dam Neuve. It was a big factory. More than 8, hey? Margaret, you were there at Ayres factory. Yeah.
Oh, Margaret, you looked at the Irish factory. At the Ayres factory.
You know, yeah. You remember that, eh? Yeah.
And the time.
Yeah. Sometimes it's overlooking the valley. That's a special place up the valley of Harrington. It's a special place owned by Sonny McCrae. He's an old Scots settlers there. And Sonny always said, you know, when I die, I'm going to be buried up there, and I'll watch over the valley, and I'll make sure that nobody ever touched the valley. So going to Harrington Valley is like taking a voyage in time. It's like we're still in the 1950s, which is really, really, really neat and beautiful. Sometimes it's preserved. Grenville Canal. They put a lot of money to preserve the Grenville Canal. Today it's really a beautiful place that you could just go walk by, eh? Yeah. But that was built in 1819. 1819. From 1819 to 1834. 15 years, close to 600 men dig the ground of Argenteuil through rocks. With shovel and pick and no dynamites because it doesn't exist. It was black powder. So they were putting, you know, with the vilebrequin, like how do you say that, the vilebrequin?
I don't know.
You don't know? Eh?
Called out a race and that when you board it all.
Yeah, for the wood, but they did that for the rocks too. And they were digging little holes and then putting black powders in the little holes, and then they would go like this and lighting the black powder and exploding the rocks. Because they had to dig through the rocks to do that canal. It took them 15 years to build the canal of the Long Sault.
At Grenville?
At Grenville to Carillon, 15 years. You know how much rocks they took from the ground? Almost enough to build an Egyptian pyramid. Almost enough for that. And those guys, they came from everywhere. Scotland, Ireland, some of them were Catholic, some of them were Protestant. The Scots, some of them were Presbyterian, some of them were from the Church of Scotland. Some of them were Baptist. They were Americans who were Methodist or Evangelist. And they were Irish, Protestant and Catholic, and French Canadian. Yeah. All these families stayed here in Argenteuil, built the houses and cropped the land and settled here. 600 men who came here. Oh, there were a couple of Brits too. Yeah.
Bricks.
This is in Milil. That's the Presbyterian cemetery, and you have the Anglican on the other side. It's really well preserved. The community there is still active, really active. And they are taking care of those places. But sometimes it's hidden. Where's that? Carillon monolith. It tells the story of Delors des Ormeaux, who fought the Iroquois at the Long Sault in Carillon. But this place here was built in 1967 by the government, who decided to take a stand and try to build or leave a trace of that story somewhere in time, in a place. They decided to build that in Carillon. It's a beautiful place. I always go there when I have to think. I sit by one of the monoliths and it helps me think. Yeah. Sometimes it's beautifully hidden in a little forest just by the Ottawa River, behind the St. Matthew's Church in Grenville. This is a mausoleum. It's Thomas Kearns' mausoleum. Thomas Kearns, he fought with the British Army in 1812 to 1814, and he participated in the burning of the White House in Washington. He was there.
What was his last name again?
Kearns. Kearns. K-A-I-R-N-S. Kearns. Thomas. Him and his brother had a mill in Grenville. And that guy was there. And when he entered the White House on the day that the Brits burned the White House, there was a special dinner organized, you know, and there were forks and knives and everything on the table. So they decided to eat the special dinner that was prepared, and they stole some of those ustensiles, you know. Years later, 100 years later, one of Thomas Kearns' great son, he decided to bring back those ustensiles to the White House in Washington. So he wrote to Roosevelt himself, and he met with Roosevelt and he gave him back those ustensiles from that day of the burning of the White House. It's quite an incredible story, eh?
You know, the Americans do not know that we burned the house.
No, they do not know. No,
They
no,
know nothing about it,
no.
except for the people of Ontario told them about a month ago.
Oh, yeah.
They want us to go down and burn the White House.
Again.
He said, he want us to go down and burn the White House. Don't trust that.
Other times it's demolished. Think about all those houses that doesn't exist anymore. Every place that you go, right? You know, in your lifetime, there are so many houses that have, or buildings that have been demolished because, you know, we wanted to make place for other things. Yeah. That's in 1960. It was demolished in 1960. It was a beautiful house. Must have been a beautiful house when it was built. Sometimes abandoned, you know, all through those leaves, tombstones. That's on the West Gore. There was an Irish Protestant community living there. They were crossing the river when there were no bridge on the Junani Road. And they would walk from Lachute up to Bremer Road, down to Gore, down to Lake Dowson. Those people settled there. They were squatters. They settled here in Argenteuil in 1816. That's 200 years ago. And they lived there as squatters on land, on government land, up until someday the surveyor come to their house and say, "What you doing here?" Yeah, we have to settle someplace. We settled here, and then after that, they had their ticket of location, and then their letter patterns would prove that they owned the land. but they were living on that land. They were cropping, farming. Today, trees, just like in Shrewsbury.
So you couldn't go anywhere you wanted.
No. Long time ago, that's the Evans family farm on Dunani Road. To go there, no GPS. No, just an old friend who knows his way around the woods. Lucky he's still alive. You know, because that old friend, when he'll die, he will probably die with all his secrets.
Yeah, you have to document them.
This is what I'm doing. And me, I'm gonna pass it down the road too. You remember that? Farmer's Supply. Yeah. The hardware. Yeah, that was Farmer's Supply and Company. At that time, it was just about to disappear, huh? So Farmer's Supply doesn't exist anymore on Lafleur Street, eh? No, you know, I was really sad when they demolished that building. Had great fond memories there. Shrewsbury. I haven't been there in Shrewsbury. It's a beautiful place. Must have been really beautiful when there was no tree, when there were cropping fields. Eh?
New Shrewsbury is in New Jersey.
Yeah, New Shrewsbury is in New Jersey, but Shrewsbury it's in Argenteuil. It's just after Gore. It's in Gore, yeah. That was the church before they burned it. Kids went there doing witchcraft. Oh, you remember that? That's the old mill in St. Andrews. The one that is still there. Yeah. It was a floor mill. Right? This we remember. St. Mungo's exists today because of the people who decided to preserve it. It was the community who took care of the building and the cemetery, right?
I got married.
You got married there? Wow. Wow. So, you know, the action of the community are really important. If there is no action, it will. Yeah, but I remember I went there, to do an open circle with all you people.
You
Yeah,
were there Christmas Eve,
Yeah. It's a beautiful place. See this place by the North River in St. Andrews? It's that same mill that I showed you. The mill is there, and Ayers factory organized there a woodcraft, right? For a long time, from about 1990, 1910 to up to a certain time. This place here, at that time, it was not a mill anymore. It was an electrical power. Yeah, electrical power. Yeah. Do you know where this is? Yeah, these are the oldest tombstones that we have in Argenteuil. Some of them,
Is that show Cemetery Harrington?
no, it's Lachute. Lachute, probably Elizabeth Baker, who was the wife of John Sullivan Hutchins, died in Lachute in 1802. 1802. So she was buried there. But that cemetery changed a lot, you know, because before there were churches in that cemetery. There was the Methodist Church, there was the Mackey's Church, and then they had to move a little bit. That's because it was a normal practice to move the corpses or the tombstones, you know, to reorganize the land because the community grew, and then you had to make places for the cemetery. Back in the days,
Principal or?
yeah, that's on Principal. Back in the days, that was named Lane's Corner. Lane's Corner were the place where Jedediah Lane Jr. established that community, American Methodist community, were established on either side of the river. And they crop that land, they cut the trees, you know, and they sell potash to make money. And you had that here, and then on the other side, you had Lachute Mills, where the mills were built. The sawmill, the grist mill, and the carding mill. So Lachute Mills and Lane's Corner became Lachute when they built Main Street. That was when the train arrived. Oh, that's still that old mill in St. Andrews. They said they say a lot of stories about that. Oh, where are we now? Lakefield? Look at the, oh, it could be Lakefield, but there's no lake around.
Sure, the red roof,
With the red roof?
red roof.
That's in Wentworth. Wentworth. It's in Louisa. That's Louisa. Yeah. Right in the middle of the woods, around lakes. So Louisa. Oh. That's a question for you. Where's that? That's exactly the foundation that were underneath that little church that you talked about. Yeah, that's the foundation of Scotch Road Cemetery. Yeah. So the church that they moved from Scotch Road Cemetery, they went up to Kilmar, and then after that to Balcano. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful church again, eh? Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So. Still that mill. There was a grist mill. That grist mill. Oh,
That's a cemetery.
that's a cemetery, it's St. Andrews. St. Andrews Cemetery, okay? This is a charnier, huh? They used to lay the corpse there during winter time. Before burying, because they couldn't dig the ground. Charnier. Charnier, yeah. Yeah, charnier, yeah.
Are you going, Linda?
Yeah.
So that old mill that I talked to you about, it was built in 1828. So that makes it today the oldest building in Argenteuil. It was built in 1828. It was not the paper mill. They used to say that this place was a paper mill. Yeah, they made paper, but it was in 1910. St. Andrews, we had a paper mill there that was built in 1803. That made paper from 1805 up until 1830. After 1830, the building burned in 1834. So there is no traces of that building. The only thing we know that, you know, every time you go to St. Andrew's post office, you can see that the old paper mill was there, right behind the St. Andrew's post office. There we are. Do you know that building? Yeah, it's right when you cross the bridge in St. Andrews, you know. That used to be the old La Douceur General Store. Yeah.
In St. Andrews?
In St. Andrews, just on the other side of the bridge. And here in the back, you see the church? That's the second Catholic church in St. Andrews. The first one was on the other side of the St. Andrews Protestant Cemetery. In the detour that goes to Carillon. They built the Catholic church between Carillon and St. Andrews. Why? Because they had to share the church. But that was in 1838. They demolished that church in 1868 and they transferred it to the village after that. Oh, again. And you see the building, how it's built, that's it's in St. Andrews, eh? Just on the other side of the, it's really, really, really beautiful. Sometimes we do renovation or restoration, but most of the time we do renovation with new materials and it's not really a success, okay? And you can see, this is the building today. Yeah. They put vinyl board. Yeah. Or sometimes it's the aluminum board, right? But the roof is still there, you see? They do not have this big porch in front, eh? Which was really, really, really beautiful. Yeah, and special. So that building is about, I would say 150 years old today. Yeah. Could we do something better? Yeah, for sure. These are the mills in St. Andrews in 1844. That's taken from this beautiful, beautiful painting made by Solomon, and an artist who came to St. Andrews in 1840, and he went up on Abbott's Hill and he painted all the details in the village. You see that big church right here? That's Christ Church of St. Andrews. That's the church. You have the North River going up to Lachute, and you have the Ottawa River right here. So he's on the top of the hill, on the other side of the river. The village of St. Andrews at that time, it was close to 800 people living there. In Lachute, in the same times, 200 at the most. So St. Andrews was the main village in Argenteuil. You can see that picture at Christ Church in St. Andrews at the museum. And when you will see it, you will probably stop and you will stay there for about, I would say, 15 minutes. Just to look at the details. It's really, really something beautiful. Yeah.
St. Andrews was the gateway to Argenteuil.
St. Andrews was the gateway to Argenteuil. That's, yeah. All the people who came up north, they had to go through St. Andrews. They didn't go through Lachute. Lachute was way up north. Lachute is about 15 kilometers from St. Andrews, 13, right? So they had to walk to Lachute. They couldn't travel by the river, you know, because Lachute is here, St. Andrews is 125 feet lower. So they had to go up the river. There were too many rapids on the North River to travel by the water. So they had to go through all the First Nation, First People sentier. Yeah, path. It's quite incredible. Are old houses important to our local heritage? Yes, they are. You know, I know where you live. This is it was the first house built on that street, on Bethany Street, yeah. It's really old, yeah. Yeah. But you know, we have to preserve those places because it's part of our heritage. It's part of our. It's different. It defines us, right? So should we preserve all of them? I wish, but I know it's not possible. Yeah. Are they just a pile of brick of old rocks? Sometimes. It always depends on how you look at it. Okay. Are they part of our cultural heritage? Yes, for sure. And we have to tell those who arrive here that they are part of our heritage. You know, our community is growing, right? From 12,000 that we were in Lachute, now we're close to 15,000. And we're going up to 17,000. That's a lot of new people who are coming here, joining our community. So we have to tell them who we are. And we can tell them by preserving those buildings, by preserving those places, you know, by showing them what it was before. Probably by bringing them into cemeteries, right? How about the cemeteries? Are we forgetting the ancestors? Does our history lies in the cemetery? The cemeteries, yes, for sure. There's so many information there about those who came here before, about your ancestors, your families. So we have to bring those people in those cemeteries to tell them that story, you see? This is-
The Prime Minister of Canada, buried in St. Andrews.
No,
Now,
he's not buried here, he's buried in Montreal.
he is?
Yeah, he is in Montreal, yeah.
I thought he was buried in St. Andrews.
No, he's not buried in St. Andrews. No, that's his, it's, not even his father is buried there.
Oh.
No, they are buried in Montreal. Joseph Abbott and John Abbott are buried in Montreal. We know why? Because he was mayor of Montreal, so they made him a little special place in the Côte des Neiges Cemetery. Yeah. But part of his family are buried. The brother of his father is buried in St. Andrews in Christchurch
There's
Cemetery.
also a street named Abbott.
Yeah, there's a street named John Abbott. Yeah. So I did something a couple of years ago with the MRC of Argenteuil, and it's an inventory of all the cemeteries here in Argenteuil. Yeah, we did this book and we wrote the story of every places. So yeah, you could find that on the MRC's website, okay? And it's in English too, so it's really easy to. We had to stop the inventory at 57 places. I thought at first that we had 35. We stopped at 57. We could have gone up to 85. Yeah. You know why? Because there are active cemeteries. There are semi-active cemeteries. There are inactive cemeteries, abandoned cemeteries, and lost or relocated cemeteries. Okay. There are places, community cemeteries, and they are family plots or cemeteries on certain piece of land. So sometimes I say to people who buy land in Wentworth or in Gore or in Harrington, always look around if there are no tombstones there, because there are probably people who are buried there. You know why they buried the people? Because the community cemetery was too far, or the community didn't have any cemetery, so they had to bury grandpa or that little kid who died of diphtheria or dysentery. They had to bury it just by the house. I saw places where a whole family was buried there. They died in 1883 during an epidemic. Yeah. So sad story. The mother and 5 kids in a matter of 2 months. Yeah. Yeah, it's in Gore. So yeah. It's terrible stories. Yeah. But it was part of the way things were, right? So it's really an interesting document. If you want to look into it, you go on the internet and you can find it. Okay, it's really easy to find. We have memorials. I know that in this church you have memorials, right? Roll of honor. The people who from Lachute, from the community, the Presbyterian community went to war, the First World War or the Second World War. Rolls of honor are really important because they leave traces of the memory of those who fought for the liberty of this country and the liberty of worldwide liberty. It's important to remember that. And to bring the kids, you see this? We do not know that name, but he was part of that, and he was from here. And he left this place here. He was probably 17 or 18 years old, and he went over, We have to talk about these stories. So memorials are really important. That's the current in the middle of a park, a little park in St. Andrews. This guy here, Benjamin Nathaniel Wales. He's from the Wales family. He's one of the founder members of the Argenteuil Museum. At that time, it was 1934. They built that cairn there to build a memorial, to remember that in St. Andrews, we had the first paper mill in Canada. The first paper mill in America was built in St. Andrews in 1803. And that paper was not made from wood. It was made from cloth. Yeah, cloth. Yeah. Clothing. So we will be able to protect them against the wear of time of nature, vandalism, thieves. Thieves. They're doing lots of damage. You see? That was Carillon, 1919. Close to 5,000 people end up there to celebrate the memory of Dollard des Ormeaux. And this year, the statue of Dollard des Ormeaux was built by Alfred La Liberté, one of the main sculptor in Quebec and in Canada. Every year, people would come from Montreal, from everywhere, to do a pilgrimage in Carillon for the memory of Dollard des Ormeaux and his friend who fought at the Long Sault. Okay, I was vandalized in 2009. See, they took everything here, the brass, bronze, brass, worth a lot of money. They came there during daytime with a white van, and they end up with all the tools, everything. They did it in front of the people. People thought they were repairing, they were stealing. Yeah. Wow. It's sad when you think about that, eh? So we built history. That was the building of the Carillon Dam. Some of you worked there at the Carillon Dam?
I worked surveying.
I surveyed, okay. So you remember that they had a little bridge here that went down the river? Yeah. One people died, eh? One guy died, yeah.
He was in the shovel.
Yeah,
Shoveling.
yeah. For 5 years, they worked there. You know what? My grandfather, Adrien Tremblay, he drove from Arvida in the Saguenay, and he drove to to Carillon, and he worked there, and he stayed there. He had lodging there in a family, and my grandma he stayed in Arvida, and he was there and he worked there. He worked there for 2 years as a contremaître. Adrien Tremblay. So there's a little part of myself in that dam. He's the father of my mother, because my mother was a Tremblay. My father was a Simard. That was the old dam built in 1883. You know, right in the middle there was a house where the log, and just by the house, the log would go down the big chute in Carillon. What they did, the chute was so big that they had to rebuild underneath from the bottom of the river. They put cages and with a ramp, so the water would go like this flat, and then right in the middle they make a passage so that the raftman could go down with les cageurs, the raftman, they could go down with the logs. And then after that, in Carillon, in the bay, they will rebuild the big logs, and they go up to Quebec City with the logs. That was incredible times. And souvenirs. You know who that guy is? Yeah, it's René Lévesque. Yeah. So we cherish and share. That was in 1967. That's the Carillon Lodge. Have you ever crossed on the logs from the river on a boat? It's quite an experience. So you go, that's the highest logs in Canada and in North America. 90 feet the door. And today, it's places we know. And we have that here. Today will become the past of tomorrow. Main Street, Lachute. 1895 about. Yeah. The thing with Main Street, what you have to remember. Lachute Mills, Lane's Corner. Then the train arrives in Lachute. It's the Quebec, Montreal, Ottawa, Occidental Railway at first, and then after that, the Canadian Pacific, okay? So they have these places, and they decide to build the train station right in the middle of those two villages to reunite them, okay? And in those days, 1867, they built Main Street of Lachute. And the people from the town, they say, we need something special as a main street because we need to have a place to parade. They were militaries, you know. Those people, they were part of Argenteuil, Argenteuil Rangers or Argenteuil Militia. And they wanted a place to parade. So this is why they made Main Street so wide. That is the explanation. It's wide because they needed a place to parade. So can you imagine? Every summer, every month, they had a military parade in Lachute on Main Street. So they built the houses not close to one to another. So this is why. And there were a river, a little river, a creek going through Main Street. So they had to canalize that water. It is as we remember. That's taken from Lachute as we remember Facebook page. You know, it's quite incredible that a Facebook page could reunite all the people from Lachute and Argenteuil all together. You know, it was something that Brent Riley started with the Bob Noble, yeah, Bob Noble. Both of them started that pages, and it's quite incredible. Everybody participate. They had old pictures. They talked about stories and everything. And you know, we decided at one time to document that frenzy, I always do that, that interest of people in that pages. And we did a documentary back in those days. It's called Argenteuil, je me souviens, or Argenteuil as we remember. So it's really interesting. And through those initiatives, we see a difference in the interest on all our cultural and patrimonial heritage. People are more aware of what we are losing if we're not taking care of, you see? So we have to talk about it to make sure that people will never forget it. It's simple as that. That was Milan Anglican in the 1870s. They had a barn just by and the church is still there. See? So the memories. What's in the name? The names of the places that we always go to, they have a story. They're holding that story. They're holding that memories. You know, we talk about. I was just talking about Mélile, but Mélile was the old called Saint Angélique before it became Mélile. And the community who settled in Mélile are probably the same who came here in Lachute. They just went up north for better land, you see? Those people didn't come from Saint-Jérôme or from Bellefeuille or Saint-Colomban. They were the same people who came through St. Andrews, through Lachute, to Gore, and then after that to Mélile. But in a matter of time, you know, about around 1850, Same thing with the chute. That's above the big chute. Where is that? Above the big chute. It's right here in the chute.
Paper.
That's a paper mill. That's the first paper mill.
I went there.
Yeah. But this paper mill, it's not even the one of J.C. Wilson or Cascade. Yeah, yeah. But that's the big chute there. Okay? Big dam. So we built dams on the North River. That's the first dam at J.C. Wilson or at Cascade today. Okay? All made out of woods and rocks. No cement. Woods, rock. So what do you think happened when the water raised? And then after that, the big pile of ice went down the river. It took the dam with them. So they had to rebuild and rebuild. It was a story of always restarting, you know? On recommence. It's the never-ending story of building bridges and mills on the North River in Lachute. How many bridges we lost through flooding? So many that we can't even remember. It's the same thing with the dams. Yeah, the flooding. Yeah, because the flooding it comes in spring, but it always comes in the fall season too with the rain. The North River is a wild river. See those guys? Looks like they're out of a cowboy movie, right? And look at the height of the dam. It's almost 20 feet. That was a big dam. So where is the big chute? The big chute is still at the same place. Never moved. It never moved. It's still at the same place. It's right where we have Cascade. Okay. So you have here, Cascade is there. That was J.C. Wilson. I'll show you a new picture right now. That's the big chute. Okay. That picture was taken this summer. Okay. I was just down the big chute. Okay. So you have Cascade here, the paper mill, and just before you cross the bridge, the Fish Bridge, which is the name because of Mr. James Fish, who was a mill owner, not because of Poisson, that's not that. Yeah. So it's the bridge that at the end of Gray Street. Gray Street, you have the old Pont Taverne qui était là, and then before crossing the bridge, you have a little sentier that you could go by the river, and then you will end up at the big chute. You know, we could do that, a special walk this summer, right? We could go see the big chute. That could be interesting. It's not dangerous unless you want to go down or you want to walk in the river. But we could be by the river. It could be really interesting to walk that path. So that's the big chute, and it's still there. It never moved. It never moved. So you know that? That's Ayers Dam. The first, the one just by the factory, built in 1910. Everything is still there. Everything inside there. It's the same machinery that they brought there in 1910 that is still rolling and producing electricity. Yeah. And probably, you know, this one, well, this is still there. That was when they built the factory. They raised they raised the factory to 5 stories. That was the big chute in 1915. 100 years later, it changed a lot, eh? Oh, probably, you know, this one. That's Dam Neuve, built in 1929. It was really Art Deco, eh? Really Art Deco. They ask engineers and architect to build something really special. You know, with all the windows here, it was windows, and you could see all the machinery inside from the river. And this one, 40 feet high. So Dame Neuve. We always joke about it in French because dame means a woman. Okay? Yeah. But we all know that dam means barrage. Okay? It's a dam. Okay? But when we had the French Bill 101 law, and we had to rename all the English street name into French name. Okay, yeah, and you know it's an oddity because back in those days they wanted to keep the name Dame Neuve. Okay, so Dame was written D-A-M Neuve, which was okay because it was a common language. It was common thing that was culturally invested in our community. People knew what we're talking about Dame Neuve, but the government didn't knew that. So the Commission de Topologie, they insist that we put a French name. So what we did, we only had an E. So it became Dame Neuve. But, you know, there were people talking about that. And they said, oh, it's probably because Mr. Ayres has a mistress or something. Yeah. So this is the oddity about Dame Neuve, okay? Yeah. Because c'est pas la Nouvelle Madame, c'est la rue de la Nouvelle Madame. No, it's not the street of the new lady, you see? Yeah. So this is Dame Neuve in 1988. The water run over the dam. Yeah, you remember that we all almost lost that dam in that days. So yeah, what about Gore? Hey, we talked about Lakefield. That's the Trinity, Holy Trinity Church in Lakefield. And those are Irishmen with the fur coats. Okay. So we have some of our famous people that we have still to remember. Hey, who was this man? Where does he come from? What is his story? Eh? When was he born? Does he have offspring? Does he have relatives? Does he have great grandchildren? We do not know. The museum ended up with this picture in the archives with no traces, nothing. Just a picture with no name. Just a man without a name, without a story. We knew that he was from the Argenteuil Rangers. So probably we could, by doing some recoup, find the story, find his ancestors. But you know, most of the time, this is why we do not know our history. It's because we do not leave traces. We do not write who's on the picture. Who are those people in the pictures? You see? Because people, you know, sometimes they have a pass out in the family. It's somebody that he's holding the story of the family. You know, he has the memory. But when that person dies, he has to give it to somebody else. But sometimes they have nobody to give it. So it ends up in oblivion. Now, how about them? They have hats. They're really well dressed. That picture was taken in 1890. Who are those people? They're from here. You know that they are from here. Which family is it? We do not know. And how about them? They worked at the Dominion Cartridge, the Dominion Cartridge Company, which became CIL in Brownsburg. They were bond girls. They worked there. Probably this one here. She comes from Halifax. She probably went back to Halifax after the war. Or she married. Eh? World War One. Yeah, that's not World War Two. That's in 1918. Yeah. Yeah. It makes you think. Is it only an old picture? That picture tells a lot. It says, your absenteeism, tie my hand. If you do not work, if you do not make bullets, I do not have bullets to fight. So those bound girls were really, really important. That's from the Second World War, okay? During that time, CIL, they were making rounds of 303 and they were making 10 millions of 303 a month. So that's 100 million of cartridge 303. 100 millions a year. More than 3,800 people worked at CIL and DIL during the Second World War. 3,800 people worked there. They had lodging problem in Brownsburg. They had to lodge people up to St. Andrews and Grenville. Sometimes people were sharing beds. Three girls a bed, or 3 boys a bed. So that picture tells more than an old picture, you know. It tells the story of those, and probably part of your families. People from your families worked at CIL. Yeah. Who is this woman? Where does she come from? What's her story? When she was born? That's Maud Abbott, Dr. Maud Abbott, one of the first doctor in Quebec. When she was young, she decided to become a doctor, but the women, they were not allowed to be doctor. And she wanted to study at McGill University, the same university that her grandfather and the brother of her grandfather, they were the founding members of that university, McGill University. So Joseph Abbott, the father of John Abbott, he was one of the founding members of McGill University. She didn't have any rights to go there. They were saying that back in those days that the women could never be a doctor because they would be too busy combing their hair. Yeah. That was the argument. But she decided to become a doctor anyhow. So she studied at Bishop University in Montreal, and she became a doctor, and she became one of the most famous doctor in the world. That was her. And she's a little girl from St. Andrews, born in St. Andrews in 1869. She grew up just on the other side of the bridge in St. Andrews. The house is still there. You can see it when you cross the bridge going to Carillon. It's on the left side. That's her house. She lived there with her grandma. Her mother died. She was 8 months old. So it's her grandmother who took care of them. Both. She's buried in the cemetery in Christchurch. Yeah. She tells a great story, and she's one of the founding members of the museum in Carillon. Yeah. So, Christchurch or tombstones. And now, one of our main, Sir John Joseph Caldwell Abbott, born in St. Andrews in 1821, and he died in 1893. He was the 3rd Prime Minister of Canada, the first Prime Minister born here in Canada. And he was the first Prime Minister born in Quebec. So he was the first Quebecer to become Prime Minister in Canada. You know, in this head, that where Canada was born. He was the main counselor of Johnny MacDonald. He's the one who said to Johnny MacDonald, we should build a country coast to coast. So the notion of a country coast to coast, it comes from St. Andrews. Probably, you know, he thought about that just walking by the North River in St. Andrews, thinking about, you know, what could be a better country. Yeah. He was behind Canadian Pacific. He was one of the founding members of Dominion Cartridge in Brownsburg. He was mayor in Montreal. He was deputy, Argenteuil deputy for so many years. And he became Prime Minister of Canada. What's in the picture? Lots of stories, eh? And we have John Hamilton. John Hamilton he's buried in St. Andrews. He was one of the first Canadian senator, 1867. He lives in Hawkesbury, the Hawkesbury Mills, the Hamilton Mills. He was one of the owner of the Hamilton Mills. And he was one of the founding members of the CIL and the Dominion Cartridge with John Abbott. They were friends, they were close friends. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we have here Thomas Henry Ayres. Without Thomas Henry Ayres, probably the shoot would have never existed. You know, they built a factory here, but they built more than a factory. They built a community, and they always, the Ayres family always reinvested money in the community. They built a factory, a golf course, a golf shoot. It was built by them. The exhibit ground, where we have the Lachute Fair, it was them. And then after that, l'Hôtel La Lorraine, it was them. So can you imagine that one day they would put all the families, the workers, even the grandfather on the train, and they would bring them to Parc Belmont in Montreal to celebrate, to do the picnic there. You've been there, right? And you know what they did? They had so much, they wanted that the people from Lachute who had that picnic day in Montreal, that they would eat the Lachute ice cream. So they put all the Lowe Brothers ice cream on one of Boyd's truck, eh? And they bring the ice cream up to Parc Belmont so we could eat the Lachute ice cream at Parc Belmont. Now this is how much money they had, you know, and they did clothing, they did tweed, they did felt for paper making, and they did plywood. They even furnished plywood for planes during the Second World War. So it was a great family, right? That's Olive Pocket. That's his wife. She's the one who invented the felt without the couture. See, because you know when the paper will dry, if you have a couture,
A seam.
Huh? Yeah, steam. Yeah, without steam. So she's the one who invented that, and they made so much money with that. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, with the scarf, it's the same thing. So it's in all the ways that you know, yeah. And I talked to you about Thomas Kearns. That's him. He's buried there in Grenville. Lemuel Cushing. Yeah, from Cushing. Yeah. That's that man. That's the old store. That's the old store in Cushing. So legacies from the past. Okay. We have this building, Carillon Baraque. That used to be an hotel. That was in the 1880s. You see the gallery all around the building, you almost, it's almost unrecognizable. That was really beautiful. Right by the Ottawa River, just by the water. And this building, that's a Carillon Museum. It's the same building. Yeah. That's in the 30s, 38 to 40. The train was passing through the parking lot. Yeah. Because we had the Carillon Harbor. Yeah. The steamship would arrive at Carillon, drop the people there, people would get on the Carillon Granville train, go up to Granville, and after that, they will hop on other boat to go to Ottawa. Yeah. So our collective history was all in that building. Yeah. And these are the magnificent exhibit that we built there. We had a special place. Argenteuil, ma vie comme rivière. Argenteuil, my life as a river. Today, this is today. Today we are in Christchurch. And this is the way we transform inside the church for it becomes an exhibit place for the museum. So it's really that robe, that dress is really old, eh?
So
Say-
unfortunately, we will have to wrap up.
Yeah, I know.
Chloe and I have to leave.
I know. It's over. Okay? That's the last slide. Yeah. So we're telling the stories, okay? Thanks. I know when I start talking,
So.
Well, I hope at home you appreciate the all the pictures and everything. So I'm here for questions. Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
On the 50.
On the 50th. Wow. Yesterday, wow.
Yes. And that's why today we're a little louder. No.
You are.
Wow, yes, we were there. And we go.
Oh.
Yes.
We made history, there was nobody there. Wow.
So I hope you appreciate it's more a reflection. We're thinking all together of ways, to preserve and to communicate our heritage, which is really important. And you are part of our heritage, and you are important. So it's important that you take the time to tell your stories. Yeah. Tell your stories to your children, to your grandchildren. Tell the stories to your neighbors about this place that about all the things that you did in your life, all the people you encountered. It is important, because sometimes all these words will come up to probably an historian, and he will make a story about it. Okay? So thank you very much. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you so much, Robert. That was amazing again. Thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Robert, that's kind of big question.
Yeah.
Coming your way, you may help me out, please.
Where did,